academics and architects, a mixed group of academic administrators and IT people, several faculty, and we look forward to your engagement in the webinar. If you see how the webinar, if you haven't done a webinar before, I'm now going to pretend I want to ask them a question, and I click the raise my hand, and you can see there's a hand if you up with the panelists in the upper right hand. That's one way to ask a question. The other way to ask a question is to type in the chat box down below, and you can either send it to me or anybody or to everybody. So you can see I just sent you all a question. To ask a question. So we want this to be an engaged conversation. There are several points in the webinar where there is formal time for conversation, and I invite you to jot down your questions as we proceed, if they can be held, or if you need to ask it urgently, raise your hand. So we have a 5-part agenda: context, catalyst, context now, where are they now? What was the catalyst for getting started? How did they get there? And what lessons have we learned? And we had the learning goals, learning outcomes printed on the website, and I'm sure that's what attracted you all to this webinar. And we have a wonderful group of people, and you can see their photos. You will see these photos again and again, and by the end of the hour, you will feel that you're personally connected and good personal friends with each of those, and you can call them up. And now we're going to turn the webinar over to the University of Richmond, and I think Doug has at least got the capacity to move the screen. So welcome to the webinar, the University of Richmond crew.
Thank you, Jeannie, and I'm going to pass it over to Susan Breeden to get us started on the conversation.
Hi, I'm University Registrar at University of Richmond, and our context now is a really good one. We have a slate of up-to-date classrooms and a really integrated process for upgrading those classrooms. It allows us to respond to the changing academic program needs and allows us to systematically reevaluate and holistically update learning spaces throughout campus.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew McBride, AVP for Facilities and University Architect. From the facilities point of view, where we are, we have a staff of interior designers, and as an architect, I've got draftspeople that can help create the alterations. So all of that work is done in-house. We also have in-house construction capabilities, and it's small. We have basically one person that's a construction superintendent, but the university will act as its own general contractor, and we have a project manager that manages the project, and the construction superintendent is in the trenches doing the actual work. We'll do between 8 to 10 classroom renovations each summer, and some of the work we'll do in-house, like demolition, metal stud, framing, hanging and finishing sheetrock, carpentry, cleanup, etc. And one of the interesting things that we do is we use summer help that are kids, essentially children of faculty staff, to help us. So I'm going to pass this on to Doug.
Hi, everyone. This is Doug West. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Telecommunications, User Services, and Media Support here at the university. To give you a sense of where we're at with technology today, 100% of our classrooms are now outfitted with a baseline technology configuration that includes presentation capabilities, usually with a projector and screen, a resident computer, most of the time installed in a teaching lectern, a sound system, a document camera, and a touchscreen control system. We also support a number of spaces that have upgraded capabilities, including higher-end projection systems, and I'll use a large lecture hall as an example there with a very nice Christie system. We have video conferencing facilities on campus. We have 10 classrooms that are spread between 6 different buildings. We have interactive boards in some of our classrooms, usually the Smart Board product. And we also do support for region-free playback devices in environments as needed. We typically provide additional input capability as well. So, for instance, over the last couple of years, we've introduced iPod docks to the standard setup in a room. And then depending on room size, we also will usually provide all laptop connections for the faculty so they don't have to be tethered to one side of the room or not. All of our classrooms are currently networked, giving us remote support capability, and we're actually in the process of implementing a new classroom management solution that will improve that even more, incorporating such things as feedback from the equipment in terms of bulb life, that.
This is Kevin Creamer. I'm the Director for the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. Speaking mostly from the faculty perspective, faculty have been engaged in most every part of this process. And from their perspective, we have enough classrooms that are of the right kinds of configurations, whether it's a seminar, a lecture, discussion room, and so forth, for the kinds of teaching that they are doing today. In addition, with standardized technology and media control panels in the classrooms, as Doug was saying, faculty are less bound to specific rooms if a move is needed for any reason. For each room that we do renovate, we follow up with surveys with the fall, with faculty and students in the fall as they are scheduled into those rooms. The nature of the survey is more qualitative information than it is quantitative, but it helps us understand how they're interacting with new features such as additional whiteboards or blackboards that are not on the primary teaching wall, and even how frequently faculty are using multimedia equipment. 56% of our faculty have reported using the multimedia equipment once or more times a week.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Monday, and I'm the Vice President for Information Services here at the University of Richmond, and we've come a long way. We'll talk about process later, but at this point, I just want to let you folks know that it's been an extremely successful initiative, our Classroom Master Plan. We've learned what our faculty and students need and how to continually assess our program and process. We've built a team that truly functions as a team and has developed a real understanding of how to work together, a knowledge of learning space design and what our faculty desire, how to communicate with deans and faculty, and how to continually assess and update our understanding of best practice, as Kevin alluded to. I can't tell you how valuable it is to have a high-functioning team of people with a common goal and a common understanding of what it takes to deliver and maintain a campus inventory that meets the needs of our university. We've learned a lot from this first phase of our Classroom Master Plan. Initially, we focused on general-purpose classrooms, but now we're poised to revisit and recast our plan. We expect to replicate a good deal of what we've learned and what worked.
If I could, if we could go back one slide. Sorry, I wasn't aware that it was going to be here, but one other thing that we do in terms of getting feedback on the classrooms as we do, we also have some quantitative measures by which we assess how faculty and students look at the learning environments that we provide them. We are participants in the MISO survey, which is a quantitative web-based survey. It's designed to measure how faculty, students, and staff view library and computing services in higher education. While we can and do compare our faculty's responses to those at other institutions, we can also look at how faculty perceive our services over time. As with most MISO schools, we're getting very good response rates. In 2012, 53% of our faculty responded. Students were over 55%. But in the survey for faculty, we ask 3 questions with regard to technology in meeting spaces and classrooms. We ask how frequently they use it, how important they consider it to be, and how satisfied they are with it. And without going into detail with all the different MISO scales, you can see that since we started participating in the survey in 2006, all 3 measures have gone up. And I think it's important to note that when you see the importance go up for faculty, sometimes that's because they want to signal to you that they're also not happy about something. That could be any number of things. But for us to be able to see that both are important, the way faculty perceive the importance of technology in classrooms and their satisfaction to have gone up is a very good indicator that we, at a broad level, are meeting the needs that faculty have. The survey does ask additional questions about support for technology in meeting spaces in classrooms, about instructional technology support overall, but just this one example gives you a sense of how we're able to get kind of a broad-based validation of the strategies that we're employing. Again, sorry for being out of order on the slide.
That's okay. Kathy, when you talked about where you are now, I think it's also important that you've got understanding with your governing board, your board of regents, or your board of trustees about the importance of this.
Yes. I'll just talk for a minute about kind of what catalyzed our process here. We attended in October 2003, a PCAL workshop on learning space design. And for those of you who don't know, PCAL was the former name of the organization that has now evolved into the LSC. A group of us from Richmond attended that workshop to help us develop plans for a learning space in an upcoming library renovation. And I happened to attend, just coincidentally, a presentation about Vassar College's classroom master plan. In 1998, they commissioned a plan to guide them through a long-term classroom upgrade program, and they described their process, and it just made so much sense to me. Like Vassar, we were investing heavily in classrooms and especially classroom technology at that point in time, but we weren't addressing the upgrades in a coordinated fashion. And we, as a result, had mixed results. We often did not realize the full value of that investment. We found ourselves installing multimedia equipment in response to faculty demand, only to find out that the sound bled into the room next door, disturbing that class, or light from the windows was too bright and it washed out the image on the screen. And we were building new spaces, new buildings at that time on our campus with great classrooms, and that seemed to highlight the ones that were deficient. So quality classrooms were distributed unevenly across campus, and I often heard our registrar say that she had difficulty matching, you know, faculty needs and preferences to appropriate classroom spaces. And so we returned from that workshop with some great ideas for our library, but I think probably the most important impact from that particular time was I came back with a new mission to organize a similar classroom planning effort here at University of Richmond. And so I immediately set up a meeting with our provost and our vice president for business and finance. And I can't take any credit. This was really an easy sell. It was a great idea, and it landed on fertile ground here at Richmond. It was sort of the right idea at the right time for us. It just, we got it right away. So we decided to launch a similar project, and like Vassar had, we involved professional architects, and we worked with our faculty and students to discover what they needed to support teaching and learning. We wanted to improve our overall classroom quality and consistency, and we wanted to bring together a team of people here at Richmond who would collaborate and coordinate and implement this plan with a holistic view, as Susan mentioned. We involved associate provosts and over 80 faculty members in this planning process, and we developed a comprehensive classroom program that would allow us to meet the needs of the community and to maximize our investment.
Yeah, and so now I think we're happy to answer some questions on what we've talked about so far.
I think, Doug, we have one question about MISO, and perhaps you can type in some of that information so that people will have it in writing for their consideration. Perhaps that you can type in your email address also so they can be in touch with you. We've already have one response that says they are also participating in that survey. Do we have other questions from the group? I'm looking for hands up here. Let me just ask, if we don't have any questions, I have one, and then we can go on to the context then. When you talk, Kathy, and others about involving faculty, and I think Doug gave a great description of how you continue to involve faculty, and we talked yesterday in the conversation about the separation of duties, shall we say, between administrators and faculty and keeping this process going. Does anybody want to comment on that?
Yes, I will. This is Kathy. Initially, when we were imagining and developing our first version of the classroom program, we involved faculty heavily in the conversations about what they needed to be successful in the classroom. We involved students as well. But we have found over time that faculty aren't eager to be involved, I guess, in the day-to-day maintenance of this program. So we consult with faculty at the appropriate time, but they're not necessarily the implementers or the executors here. More consultative than actual participants. We have which Susan will talk about later, an execution committee that moves forward every year. We
have a question from Muriel Poston, and I'll just read it rather than, it's about does the diversity of programs at the University of Richmond with your business school and your other school, did that affect the planning or enhance the planning?
Yes, it did. We actually initially, our first initial scope was general purpose classrooms, and at the time our first iteration of the plan, we had about 86 general purpose classrooms on campus. We have since expanded that to include law school classrooms and business school classrooms, which were different at that time, and we didn't include them in the first round. And we have a lot of special purpose programs, like we have a lighting design studio for our theater department. We have digital art spaces, we have music laboratories, and those are all now included. Informal learning spaces are all a part of our scope today.
Very helpful. You've come a long way, and I bet when you think about it, you didn't realize would get so far. So can we have some conversation about really how bad it was before all this, or what Kathy said? Reflected on our lack of coordination. Susan, are you going to make some comments there?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of campuses, we had buildings that spanned almost 100 years. Each building was very different and had been tweaked to suit the one or two disciplines that were resident in that building. Kathy alluded to earlier, the new classroom styles were only really available when a new building was built or we did a major renovation. And then everybody wanted to be in the new classroom, so they were in serious demand. If a class outgrew its classroom, it was very difficult for me to move it to another building because there was no similarity in terms of setup or equipment, so they were kind of stuck. We had two different multimedia setups on campus at one point with separate keys. So if you taught in this room with the metal cabinets, you needed this key, and if you changed, then you had a different setup with a wood cabinet. You needed another key. And the multimedia was kind of added to existing classrooms when there was extra money available or there was a specific faculty member who needed it. And adding multimedia equipment to a classroom, as Kathy mentioned, it was kind of retrofitted, and it caused a lot of other problems. The acoustics were bad, the lighting was bad, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it was difficult to do.
And this is Andrew. From a facilities point of view, like Susan said, you know, classrooms were done only when we had major building renovations. So if anything, any work that was not associated with one of those renovations was done, it was done via a work order, and the work was not coordinated. So you know, you never kind of knew what you were getting. It really wasn't up to the standard that we've brought ourselves up to now. For example, things that would have been done included, you know, fixing damaged walls and painting. Worn-out carpet would be replaced as part of our annual carpet project, so there was no necessarily consistency within the building. And I always loved this one. Any electrical or data needs, if the walls could not be fished, i.e., you know, run the power in the wall, it was surface mounted, which is one of the big things that I hate to see. Again, at that point in time, 8 or so years ago, we were in the middle of building an addition to and renovating our Gottwald Center for the Sciences. And so the type of work that was going on there, we raised the bar with regard to the classrooms. But and like Susan said, it made all the existing classrooms look worse. So that's where we were. Doug, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll say a few words about the technology capabilities at that time. And we had a real mixed bag of capabilities all over campus in terms of technology in the classrooms. At the time, we had a number of classrooms that were outfitted with TVs and some playback capabilities, such as a standard VCR. We had some rooms that were outfitted with a projector and a screen. Some were electronic and some were manual. In most of those spaces, we had begun to install desktop computer systems as well. Control of the AV equipment at the time was usually with a remote control device, or for those with multiple devices in the room, multiple remote controls as well. We had a limited number of rooms with the installed touch control systems. Today I mentioned that that's 100% across the board. Our media support group supported a number of portable setups all over campus at the time. Usually it was on demand and just ahead of a class starting. We did have a process in place for requesting funding for new media systems, but it wasn't necessarily a closely coordinated effort with facilities, and the registrar has already been pointed out. Feedback after new systems were installed was generally positive for the technology, but it also pointed out that we should have addressed other needs, such as lighting and acoustics, things like that.
Again, from the faculty perspective, and this has been touched on a little bit, but the biggest challenge for them was that there weren't enough of the kinds of classrooms that they were looking to teach in a discussion, lecture, back and forth capability was far and away what we learned that they wanted. But and before we got started with the classroom master plan, we didn't even know what kinds of classrooms we were going to need. It's also safe to say there was a good amount of dissatisfaction with the classrooms and how they were updated. Back to something Andrew was saying a little bit, perhaps the carpet would get replaced in a given classroom, but faculty may have felt that some other aspect of the room was the problem, and that didn't always contribute to the sense that the classrooms were what they needed to be. As Susan pointed out, classes couldn't be moved frequently because a given classroom might be the only space where the specific configuration of capacity, along with the kinds of seating that you need for the class, the technology, the pedagogical method, all of that was available. It is, however, worth stating that while we had all of these kinds of challenges, things at Richmond weren't bad. We weren't in a trouble spot. It's just that we knew that we could do better, and we wanted to approach the future more holistically than we had done before.
We've got some wonderful questions here, and since they're so wonderful, I'm going to let the people talk to them. Tim Johnson, would you like to repeat your question?
Oh, sure. Let's see. We've got a couple of questions.
Only get one right now.
Only one right now. Okay, so we're from the University of New Mexico. There's several of us around the table here watching. So again, we'd like to know how many classrooms University of Richmond supports, and like Tim, the other Tim's question, how many of those are centrally registrar controlled versus departmental, and is there a different support model in place for those type of rooms?
I can speak as registrar. They're all university spaces, so they're all registrar controlled. Okay. We do have some that are very specialized spaces, for instance, some of the art studios that only the art department would actually use, but they're technically all university spaces. You know, in terms of support, we'll support them all, but we'll also look at usage. Some of them wouldn't be as heavily used, for instance, as a generally, you know, classroom that 10 different departments use over the course of a week. So, you know, but we would support them all, and they're all university-controlled classrooms.
How many, Susan?
Oh, yeah.
What do we have, about 120 total?
Yes.
I think so.
Yep, about 120, and strictly from an AV support standpoint, there are a lot. We've talked about some informal spaces that are outfitted with AV technology. We have a lot of conference rooms and meeting spaces. They don't necessarily hold classes there, but we do support them through Central IS. And the total number of spaces that we are supporting today with AV technology in that space is almost 200.
And you asked ask about budget, Tim, when we first envisioned this plan, the provost and the vice president for business and finance and I got together and we cobbled together a budget of $1.7 million. And that money lasted us almost 8 years, I believe. It's been 8 summers for these renovations. We then recently have gotten through our budgeting process an annual allocation of $300,000 for classroom.
Oh, wow.
Classroom master plan.
Oh, fantastic.
And for a student body of?
We have an FTE of about 4,500, or about 4,000, I guess, and our undergraduate population is about under 2,800.
We have one more question that I'm going to let Sally Granz ask, and then we'll move on, and we still have 2 more times for questions. Sally?
I have no mic.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, I was just curious what professionals that you retained. Were there,
It was an architectural firm.
okay, and so did they stay with you the whole 8 years?
No, it was just for about a year's worth of engagement in developing the classroom program and vetting that across campus.
Okay, great. And did he have a lighting and mechanical engineer then with him?
No, we did that all in-house. This is Andrew from facilities. Basically, once we got moving, we did it all in-house. I do have an engineer on staff, but it wasn't terribly complicated. You know, once we got the basics down, you know, we wanted to highlight the whiteboards. We wanted to be able to have dimming capabilities or separate switching, and we can get into that later as part of the lessons learned. But again, it was all done with us.
Yeah, and I'll add from the technology standpoint that with the exception of a few capital projects where we've had architectural firms that engaged AV consultants on some design work, we do most of the AV design on campus internally as well.
Now, as far as the you know, the specific say electrical drawings or something like that, this is fairly simple. If we need to have something done, it'll be a design build process that we've got from the electrician, for example.
This is Jeannie. Let me interpret Sally's question in a different way, because you are speaking solely about renovated spaces right now. But I know you've got some new buildings, including a new science building on your campus. So your conversations with architects for new spaces, when you're bringing an outside design firm in, I bet they love to work with a community that has its act together.
Oh, absolutely.
Talk about, you know, just 2 minutes on your interactions in putting your new science building together. We won't name the architects. We aren't naming any architects. But the conversations are different than you might have had before you had your team, right?
That was already in process, Jeannie. So, but we did have several other buildings that we did since then. And, you know, because of our classroom master plan committee that we meet once a month, we work as a team and have been through so many things that interaction then feeds to meeting with the architects and help them determine what the classroom layout should be, what types, so that's part of the programming. You know, you need a classroom that is a certain size. You might need some seminar rooms that are different size.
Okay, Andy, you can talk more about that, but the involvement between client and architects is part of the planning to plan process that we're talking about in the LSC. So let's move ahead now, and we're going to talk. I'm going to be quiet now and give it back to Richmond.
I'm going to talk a little bit, this is Susan again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, how we got from then to now, kind of look at the steps we took to develop and evolve the master plan program. In 2004, as Kathy said, she came back and brought these ideas, and the ground was fertile. The VP for Business and Finance, the Provost, and Kathy, as the VP for Information Services, developed an interdivisional goal to create a master plan for the University of Richmond's general purpose classrooms. They put together a committee consisting of representation from Information Services, from my office, the Registrar's Office, University Facilities, University Services, and the various schools. In most cases, we had an associate dean involved from each school. The university also engaged an architectural firm that was experienced in working with college classrooms to help us in the process. The initial program goals to improve the overall quality and consistency of the general purpose classrooms, to develop some common classroom types, to create flexible environments to accommodate different pedagogical methods, to develop a comprehensive renovation program incorporating technology upgrades, furnishings, and environmental updates, and coordinating campus capital expenditures on general purpose classrooms. We developed some baseline data with the help of the architect. We did an audit of all our current classroom space and a utilization analysis to look at the number of courses offered, the enrollment, and the current scheduling distribution. While there was a difference across many of the buildings, our average usage was about 57%, and according to consultants, this was pretty good. Average classroom utilization for state institutions about 65%, and for private 40 to 50%. In 2005, 54% of general purpose classrooms had presentation media. Consultants and members of the committee met with over 80 faculty members representing all 5 schools and met with representative groups of students. Focus groups were organized by the school and disciplines and used to ascertain faculty teaching styles, their preferences, their technology requirements, the environment requirements, and there were 2 meetings with each group. We met first to kind of gather information and then again to validate the conclusions we'd come up with. Some of the conclusions we came to: the faculty preferred discussion-style classrooms. There was a general preference for tables and chairs over tablet armchairs, and this is especially true with students, who I think the tablet armchairs were much less comfortable, and some faculty, though, preferred the tablet armchairs because they were much easier to move around. There was a strong preference for flexible furnishings that they could rearrange in different configurations, and faculty really wanted baseline audiovisual technology with a consistent interface, so they didn't have to rethink things every time they moved or the beginning of every semester. There was a real need for adequate lighting controls, environmental controls, and we needed to improve acoustics and, of course, window shades. When we moved to multimedia, the lighting in the room, we had to look at the whole picture. Arts and Sciences, our School of Leadership Studies and School of Continuing Studies faculty all had very similar preferences. Law and Business had somewhat distinct requirements. No big surprise there. They do mostly case study type of classrooms and really needed things set up a little bit differently. What we discovered, and it kind of speaks for itself, is that we had an adequate number of classrooms, but we didn't have quite the right classrooms. We had more lecture-style classrooms than we needed and fewer discussion-style classrooms than the faculty wanted. So what we needed were more rooms that would support the way they were teaching seminar-style discussions. What we did at that point was put together a committee to implement the master plan, and it represented different points of view and different areas of expertise. The official name is the Classroom Oversight, Coordination, and Implementation Committee, COCIC, or the Classroom Committee. And it has members from the Registrar's Office. We have the Director of Telecom, User Services, and Multimedia Support, Associate VP for Facilities, Director of Teaching, Learning, and Technology, Director of University Services, Lab Manager, Interior Designer, Project Manager, and the people who do the day-to-day scheduling. So we've tried to include the people who understand and deal with the classrooms from all different points of view. So far, we have been renovating 8 to 10 rooms annually, and typically calendar, we start in early fall, and we know the classrooms that are having problems. So or the ones we've had requests about. So we know which ones those are, and then we talk to the deans and figure out what's going on in terms of new programs that are coming, or changes in programs, so we can incorporate that into our planning. We develop a list of suggested places, and about mid-October, our fall break, we go through walkthroughs of all those classrooms and really determine, evaluate current condition, how the classroom's oriented, how it functions, and we identify possible options, what could work. We draw up and discuss these options, and at that point, we actually get the faculty involved. We've discovered over time that it works a little better if we give the faculty some things to react to rather than start with a blank slate. The faculty comments are taken into account, changes are made, and about that time we're also receiving feedback from the rooms that we did last year. So we're hearing from the students who are in those rooms and the faculty who are using them. We take that feedback into account. In January, we develop a reasonable scope of projects with budget estimates and take those final recommendations and budget estimates to the President's Cabinet for approval, and then we renovate in the summer.
Susan, we've got a question which I think is asking you for a little more elaboration of what you talked about. What do you guys talk about every month when you meet?
Oh my gosh.
When you say we, you mean the whole committee walks into an individual classroom that is up for grabs and looks at it?
The whole committee. Yep. And we go through a list, you know, look at the carpet, what's this look like? These desks, how old are these? These boards are in good shape, no they're not. You know, this area wants to move to whiteboards. A new program's coming in this area, what can we do to upgrade this room to make it, you know, work better? You know, we did an art classroom. We looked at how we could make this work better for art, you know, take out the colored tiles. It's basically a white box now with, you know, stuff all around the walls where they can pin up artwork and things like that. I mean, we kind of sit through and go through everything in the room to figure out how the light's coming in, do the shades work now, you know, the whole thing. I mean, other people can elaborate, but we really, you know, look at it from the carpet to the ceiling tiles.
So use the arts faculty use that project as an example then. So you've done your due diligence, you've looked at the machine, you've talked to the faculty, you've examined their space, you've done some in-house, what you did spend the month on, and then you go back to the faculty, right?
Yep. And they tell us, hey, this will work. We need different storage here. What about this? You know, these desks won't really work for what we want. Can we come up with something else that would allow them to do X, Y, and Z? You know, they want multimedia, but they don't need it as fancy as we've designed. They just want it over in this corner because they only use it, you know, this many times. I mean, you know, it depends on the room. We get all different kinds of things. They really needed some very specialized storage, and, you know, so we had to do more research to figure out what would work for them.
Yeah, and this is Andrew, the interior designer that is part of the team, is taking that information that through interaction with the faculty and testing different solutions, both layouts and also specific furniture. So there's a lot of massaging going on, especially during the fall.
We've got a question, and I'll come back to that, but let me contrast, Susan, what you said, or Doug or somebody said that these are all, the technologies are the same in each of the classrooms, so people can move from classroom to classroom, but some of the classrooms are designed for specific needs? Explain this to me.
Yep, this is Doug. I'll take that. Or I'll start out, and Susan can certainly add something as well. By baseline, I'm referring to really a basic set of capabilities that we are installing into the room that includes some of the things that I talked about. When we talk about specialty spaces, we're talking about, for instance, an upgraded projection system with higher resolution capability, higher brightness factor, in a new, to support a new film studies program. The same thing is true in the art environment. They like really, really bright images, high-resolution projection systems to show the artwork on a screen. And in those environments, we are installing something that we consider to be an upgrade over the standard that's employed in classroom environments around the rest of campus.
Just to add something to what that Doug's group does, that it's probably so matter of course that he doesn't think about it, but they design an interface for faculty to use that's as similar from year to year as we can possibly make it, so that they're very comfortable no matter what classroom they enter, they can control the room.
Yeah, and just from a layperson's point of view, having had to make some presentations, you know, you're on stage in a sense, and you want to be able to, you don't want to fumble. And so it's very important that the faculty, if they're used to something, it's consistent across campus.
Yep, so just this actual shot that's up on the questions slide right now is the classroom that we're talking about where, again, what's the board we put around the walls there, Andrew?
I don't know, stick-up board, you know,
yeah.
homosoda.
But then there's a whiteboard that's integrated at one part of the classroom that's completely seamless around the rest of this stuff. But the multimedia is in the corner. It's the same basic setup that's in every place. So that, again, the faculty could have been teaching in another room, could come in here and use it. But you see also we've got some very specialty lighting that's going on in this space, and that the furniture is movable depending on what the class is doing in that space.
We have a question about, as you're, I think if I could interpret, Carol, do you want to ask it? Or I think you're muted, Carol, so let me ask it for you. Are there any elements that you've done one year and decided it didn't work from your survey?
We have, and I may let Doug talk about this, we have certainly migrated over the years. Our first lecterns were huge in the middle of the room, and we have gotten those smaller and smaller over the years. So there's things that have evolved.
Yeah, great example of a technology component that we have tried to get rid of is we've tried to phase out VCR functionality over the past several years. But it's kind of a funny story in that wherever we have pulled it out, we've had to go back and put it back in because there are enough faculty that are still using VCR tapes to do presentations in their spaces. At some point, we will indeed phase those out. And not so much from a standpoint of making corrections, but I think Susan touched on it in that we're always evolving. So for instance, this past summer, we incorporated Skype in the room as a standard build for the equipment functionality. So now a faculty member that wants to use Skype in that classroom, there's a camera dedicated to that function as well as the software residing on the resident PC.
The microphones in the ceiling.
As well as drop-down mics in the ceilings in those environments. And we are considering that a standard going forward for classroom renovations.
And from a facilities point of view, certainly the furniture is constantly evolving.
Lighting.
The lighting and lighting control, I think when we first started doing this, we had some really expensive, I don't remember the manufacturer, but it was rather complicated, and we got uncomplicated by just putting in a number of three-way switches, letting having the other three-way close to where the lectern was so the professor could control things there.
Yeah, we think of it as an additional expense that's not needed to try to tie in the lighting systems to the control panels for the AV systems in the rooms.
And then the other thing is with the shading. I think that Doug's projectors have gotten to be so strong that we don't have to be so literal about blackout shading. Sunscreening is certainly important, but unless it's a really important space where you have to get it super dark for that real crisp look, we've gotten away from the blackout shades in the tracks that they go in.
Julie has a question about what the space utilization means. National baseline data on use space. Can you email her privately, Susan, where that information came from?
Yes.
Okay.
That came from the architects, but I can look up the notes.
Thank you very much. Muriel has a question. You want to ask it, Muriel, or you're now live?
Oh, thanks. Tam had raised the issue about active learning spaces, and I wanted to know how many of their general purpose classrooms they had identified as configured for active learning.
I would say almost all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, even...
I mean, distance or interactive from over the...
I think what Muriel is talking about is what is the kind of the identified round tables with 9 chairs around them.
I was going to say, it's similar to the scale-up model. I asked the original question about the active learning studios.
Right.
What percent?
We've got a number of them. I don't know the number, though. I mean, but I can start spouting out the classroom numbers, G22, G20, and some other spaces, but I don't know that.
We have probably a dozen of them at this point.
That's probably right.
With the round table configuration.
With the chairs around it, like
right.
How many students do you accommodate in that that you're envisioning?
But almost all of our classrooms have furniture in them that is designed to allow the instructors to group students into active learning groups. They may not be round, but they are configurable to have small work groups working together often with technology plugged in.
So that's in you have them kind of clustered before as either seminar space or discussion lecture. So your discussion lecture spaces can all be configured for smaller group work. Is that correct?
But yes, the furniture is designed to be able to be put in rows or into use for discussion and then broken apart for small group work. But we do have several rooms now, it's probably over a dozen, where faculty have really wanted those big round tables that you were describing. Many of them are technology-enabled tables, too. They have power or computers installed.
Also, just to give a little bit of perspective, a little over 67% of our classes have fewer than 20 students. So that also, I think, lets you know a little bit about the environment that we're working in.
We're a small-scale environment.
But some of those active learning spaces, as you've described them with the round tables, are made for 24, 26 kids. Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions here, and I think one of them.
It wasn't even a closet with a cabinet with some stuff in it. The only thing they had that we didn't have was the.
Talk about your priorities when you walk into a space, and so Dean of Business and the Dean of Science and the Dean says this absolutely has to happen this year. How do you set a multi-year priority for spaces?
Susan's probably the best to talk to that. Susan?
We started with general use classrooms. These were the classrooms that are used by 4 or 5 different departments. They're heavily used. You have everything from freshman seminars to majors classes. So the majority of students go through 1 or 2 of these classrooms, every day. And we just felt like that was the place to get the most bang for the buck in terms of upgrading those classrooms and making them work well.
And we involved the deans in the process of setting priorities, and we really, although you can imagine that you would, we haven't had too many times when we've had to make hard choices. I mean, we've managed to sort of smooth this out so that people are getting attention paid to classrooms that are important to them on a regular enough basis that we don't have a crisis.
It's interesting from our point of view. It's a combination of, all right, how much money do we have available to do, but also how much capacity do we have from a managing point of view. That tends to limit what we can do or not do.
People are pretty reasonable if they understand that there's a plan and, we're working to capacity.
In the notes you sent me as we were working this out, you talked about, and you may have said it, but I don't remember you saying it, about starting small. So talk a little bit about, again, going back to the general purpose classrooms, how that kind of set the stage for a larger initiative.
Well, the first year that we implemented some of the ideas that surfaced out of our discussions with faculty, we picked 4 classrooms. It was really an interesting experiment, and two of them, there were 2 matched sets of classrooms. They were nearly identical pairs. There were 2 seminar-style rooms and 2 discussion-style rooms, and we actually tried different furniture in the different classrooms, and we had the classes switch mid-semester and then talk to us about what had worked best for them, and we learned a lot. It was really interesting, hard for us to understand now, but back then our faculty, our students wanted tables and chairs with wheels, and our faculty were a little nervous about that. I'm not sure what they were afraid of, but they didn't want students having chairs with wheels. And so we tried it, and you know, people figured out in the real world that was not an issue and that there were benefits. And so we learned a lot. We shared what we learned. You know, we talked it out among ourselves and with the faculty, and took that set of those set of controls and took them forward to the next year's renovation, and we just constantly iterate. But we started with 4 classrooms the first year, incorporating our findings from our discussions with faculty and students.
And David, I think you're still on. If you want to ask your question, Terrence?
Sure. I was just curious about what specific information was in this classroom master plan.
Well, as Susan mentioned earlier, we did a classroom audit. We did a classroom utilization analysis, and that was basically how often was that classroom filled, you know, during what hours, and we also, I think, looked at capacity and number of seats that were filled, and we did a classroom program, which I think you saw the slide earlier, which said this is the classroom inventory that we have. This is the classroom inventory that our faculty would like us to have, and where's the disconnect. For example, we had a lot of lecture classrooms that we didn't need, and we needed way more discussion-style classrooms. So that was an outcome. We did not produce a paper. We produced a presentation that we took around and talked to anybody that would listen to us. We did many, many forums on campus. We met with departments. We met with the deans. We met with the cabinet. We just had a lot of conversations. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly. And I just I got all that information from your presentation. I was just wondering if there was kind of a roadmap afterwards that said, okay, we have these 6 buildings and these 86 classrooms. We're going to start to do this cluster first in the first year, and then so on and so on.
I'm sorry. Yes, we did do that. We produced a spreadsheet, and we did 2 models. We did a 10-year model and we did a 15-year model that addressed all 86 of those classrooms, and we tried to cluster them, you know, for economies. We said we'd like to work in 1 or 2 buildings a summer and not be doing 8 classrooms in 8 different buildings. And we continue to do that, but we developed 2 models, and what we imagined was the budget that it would take to support that effort over a 10- and 15-year period.
Thank you.
I think it's also logical, but the utilization, the ones that had poor utilization correlated to the fact that they weren't very good classrooms.
Right.
And, people didn't want to teach there, so that was, a highlight of, okay, well, we need to fix this. And when we did, it truly changed the utilization, correct, Susan?
Yes, definitely.
That sounds like a nice upbeat to move to the lessons learned, and there'll still be a chance for questions after the lessons learned. And I was glad David came on, because he's doing a webinar on informal learning spaces in December for the LSE, he and his colleague from the University of Illinois, Chicago. And they have an equally exciting process and story to tell. So what lessons have you learned in all of this?
This is Susan again. I'll say some of the things I think that have been really important. We learned the value of a single committee overseeing the entire process. And the classroom committee now, it's not only overseeing the master plan process, but anytime anybody wants to make changes or upgrade a classroom, from other sources, comes through the committee, which is really helpful because we can keep things standard and and moving forward. We talked about the value of starting small on the projects, the offer opportunity for immediate and visible impact, and gave us really good feedback on what worked and what didn't. It's really important to engage faculty and users at the right time. We tried in the beginning to say, hey, what would you want in a classroom? And they had all sorts of ideas, and in some cases we could make those work. In some cases they were very diverse. It seemed helpful to come with an idea, how would this work? What would you change here, if we would give them something to react to? And Kathy talked about the importance of clustering renovations to make the best use of our resources. We would try to do at least 3 or 4 rooms in one building to really, give that area. Otherwise, we had people fighting to use the one room in that building that we had upgraded. So, if you did 3 or 4, you could really make an impact in that specific area.
This is Andrew. From a facilities point of view, this summer was a great example of where the benefit
Doug is going to change the slide.
The benefit of us acting as our own general contractor, we were shorthanded this year, and we had to get GCs involved, and the control was not as good. We still had our own project manager, but the in-the-trench people made a huge difference. So it just reinforced what a good thing we had going, and we certainly, as soon as we can fill our position, will continue that. The collaboration between those of us in design and construction, with Doug in technology, and those folks that have to run this stuff like Susan and Kevin, really make it efficient in creative planning. And over the years we've been continually monitoring and tweaking where we can go better. Prime example, and this is really something stupid, but with whiteboards, for example, don't put a seam in the center. If you've got a wall-to-wall whiteboard, have the biggest part in the center and then put the seams further out. And then the flexible furniture, we keep talking about the flexible furniture, but I just want to say that there's a double-edged sword associated with that. And we didn't really anticipate this until after going through this for a few years. And that was, no one takes ownership. When you've got general classrooms, someone comes in there and throws the chairs and tables all around, and it works really great for them, but then they don't put it back together. And so then the next guy that comes in and teaches is all mad. So I don't think we've solved that problem yet. But be looking to that if you do that. Doug?
So just a couple of very short words about the technology side. One is the importance of having the same baseline AV with touch panel control systems, which are really the same or very similar in terms of programming in all rooms and locations. That's obviously been a big help to us. The importance of paying attention to specialty needs as well. We've talked about having Skype now, as well as video conferencing in some classrooms on campus. And then I think in answer to one of the chat questions I've seen, the value of predictable schedules for maintenance and refreshing of the technologies. From a budgeting standpoint, that's always been part of our planning looking forward. Today we plan for a 5-year refresh of at least the main components in a room. We get 5-year warranties on our projection system, so that helps us kind of keep up with that. And it also allows us to manage our resources correctly in terms of the technicians that are assigned to handle all of the spaces on campus.
Susan has already touched on this, but there's no question that engaging the faculty at multiple points along the way is vital. We were lucky we involved the faculty at the beginning of the whole process of putting the classroom master plan together, and then we went back to them to validate that to be sure we were heading in the right direction. But then during the annual nomination process, we looked to them to help determine the priority and understand the concerns for different renovations. On several cases, there's a teaching effectiveness group on campus, and they host lunches, and we've presented at those, and faculty have come to talk about what they like, what they don't like, and in some cases even to speak to be advocates for rooms that they hope will be renovated in the future. During the design process, as I think we've already said, we want to hear from the faculty so they can explain what the problems are in an existing space. We don't always see everything just walking in the room and looking at it ourselves. But then we can go back, validate those solutions, and then get their buy-in on the decisions that, as we're making them. In the semester after the renovation, we've spoken about this before, but we want to find out what the unexpected positive and negative outcomes of the design may be. So we do go back afterwards to get information on the changes that we've had over time, and that has led to changes in our approach for future years. So things, as Doug was saying, with making classrooms Skype ready now is because we've been getting more and more requests for that, and we're able to now implement that as a standard going forward in most, not all, but in most of our classrooms. In addition to the qualitative feedback, it's important to see if you can find quantitative approaches to validating at a broad level that the plan is accomplishing its goals. For Richmond, the MISO survey provided feedback on the technology aspects of that classroom strategy.
I'll be quick because I think we're running out of time, but we review, assess, and refresh our plan every year. Faculty and student needs change, so don't assume that it will be a static document. Involve the faculty and all administrators who support teaching and learning, plan from the inside out, and develop a plan that fits your institutional culture and context. That's really important. And I think regular reminders to people on campus every opportunity you get on how important this is to the institution's mission. I mean, it is what we do, after all, teaching and learning, and we need to support it with those, with appropriate spaces. Take advantage of new building projects. Anticipate future budgeted building projects and determine the impact of the planning that you're doing today on those spaces. And then focus on enhancing the quality of learning for all students. Develop classrooms that are designed to enhance interaction and teaching effectiveness and student learning. And the classroom program needs to support that community of learners. So that's what we've learned.
And I think that's a wonderful ending to begin and end with, focusing on learners. And I'll speak for the people on the webinar to the University of People with a thanks, a loud applause for a wonderful, very informative webinar. And I'll remind the people on the webinar that they have access to the audio video. And if you can't figure out how to do that, Jen will be telling you how to do that. And we say thanks to Jen for all her work, too. The last slide gives you email addresses of the people at Richmond, and I think some of you have some pretty specific questions, and you can pick the email. I think the email address of the person with whom you'd like to continue the conversation off that slide, if that's fine. And the last slide is about the upcoming LSC webinars. We're going to do some flipping in October and November and switch those two. But we look forward to you joining us for the next webinar, and I thank you again to the participants for being a part of this, and to the University of Richmond for your wonderful sharing of your wonderful story. Thank you. Bye-bye.